Greetings. This morning, Dave Cullen, aka Computing Forever on YouTube, that's the name of his channel, he posted a video about how the European Union was getting ready to pass some more censorship in the European Union. Now, one was a stupid link tax that if you post links to certain things, you'd have to pay a tax on it, and I don't know how the hell that's going to work. That's really dumb, and that's going to hurt a lot of things. But the other one was about making the individual website responsible if a user posted copyrighted content. And that puts companies in a, like Facebook, YouTube, any other like Minds.com or Gab.ai, that puts them in a precarious situation. Now, there's also the potential for it to actually affect freedom of expression in the United States because, if YouTube starts censoring things based on what the European Union wants and they just apply that filter across the board, that's going to hit the United States too. And there are other ways in which it could. But this reminded me of a paper that I saw a couple of years ago out of the European Union talking about where they wanted to go in the future, making a stronger Europe. And when you read through this paper, it's a fairly long paper, but when you read through this paper, you get the impression that Europe, or the European Union, sort of wants a global empire. And so I'm going to go through a few bits of this. Now, one of the things with this, it's a global strategy for the European Union's foreign and security policy. And if you scroll down here, you'll see June of 2016, so almost 2 years ago, actually pretty much 2 years ago. And like I say, it's a fairly long, dense document. I'm not going to read it all, but one of the things that you get is there are a lot of phrases used. There are a lot of things used that are basically cultural Marxism in this paper, and I'm not going to focus on those. But I've got to tell you, I saw enough cultural Marxism in this paper that if an enhanced radiation weapon went off above Brussels, I don't think it would bother me very much. Really, I don't. That's cultural Marxism is a bad thing. It's it and political correctness and all that crap. They're not actually about making the world a better place. Maybe they are to the idiot college kid marching down the street with their sign, but for the people pushing this shit, it's about power politics. It's about making you shut up, or it's about demonizing you or making you worth less in other people's eyes, so that they can have more power. That's what it's about. But let me get on to the foreword by Federica Mogherini, because this foreword will it does kind of set the tone for this document. The purpose, even existence of our union is being questioned, yet our citizens in the world need a strong European Union like never before. Our wider region has become more unstable and more insecure. The crises within and beyond our borders are affecting directly our citizens' lives. In challenging times, a strong union is one that thinks strategically, shares a vision, and acts together. This is even more true after the British referendum, and I'm assuming it's talking about Brexit. We will indeed have to rethink the way our union works, but we perfectly know what to work for. We know what our principles, our interests, and our priorities are. Yes, power, power, and even more power. This is no time for uncertainty. Our union needs a strategy. We need a shared vision and a common action. None of our countries has the strength nor the resources to address these threats and seize the opportunities of our time alone. So what it's saying here is none of you are strong enough, so give me more power. Give a bunch of unelected Eurocrats in Brussels more power. That's what they're saying. But as a union of almost 500 million citizens, our potential is unparalleled. Our diplomatic network runs wide and deep in all corners of the globe. Economically, we are in the world's G3. We're the first trading partner and first foreign investor for almost every country in the globe. Together, we invest more in development cooperation than the rest of the world combined. It is also clear, though, that we are not making full use of this potential yet. A vast majority of our citizens understands that we need to collectively take responsibility for our role in the world. Sounds a little socialisty to me there, but and wherever I travel, our partners expect the European Union to play a major role, including as a global security provider. We will deliver on our citizens' needs and make our partnership work only if we act together, united. This is exactly the aim of the global strategy for European foreign and security policy. Global is not just intended in a geographical sense, it also refers to a wide array of policies and instruments the strategy promotes. It focuses on military capabilities and anti-terrorism as much as on job opportunities, inclusive societies, and human rights. So there's your first social justice term, inclusive societies. It deals with peace building and the resilience of states and societies in and around Europe. The European Union has always prided itself on soft power and will keep doing so because we are the best in this field. Well, that's debatable. However, the idea that Europe is an exclusively civilian power does not do justice to an evolving reality. For instance, the European Union currently deploys 17 military and civilian operations with thousands of men and women serving under the European flag for peace and security. Our own security and our partners for Europe, soft and hard power go hand in hand. So what it's talking about here is the beginnings of a European Union army. I don't think it's ever going to successfully create one, but I think it wants one. I really do. The strategy nurtures the ambition of strategic autonomy for the European Union. Strategic autonomy, the ability to act and think and work on its own. And it's talking about this in a military sense. And then it'll go on and talk about working with NATO. And it's like, wait, if you want strategic autonomy and you want to work with NATO, you're not acting in an autonomous manner. So there is a bit of a contradiction within this document. It goes on to talk more about this, but there is a bit of a contradiction. And a lot of times when you see a contradiction like this, what you've got is politicians who are trying to sell you a bill of goods, and they're kind of full of it. It happens all the time. It's like, I'll give you all this free shit and balance the budget at the same time. In other words, I'll spend more and balance the budget. Just doesn't work. That's what they're doing here. The other option is they just don't know how to be logically consistent and are stupid. Now, this is the European Union, and I would believe that both are true at the same time. But anyways, this is necessary to promote the common interests of our citizens as well as our principles and values. Yet we know that such priorities are best served when we are not alone, and they are best served in an international system based on rules and multilateralism. Rules that I'm sure the European Union would be more than happy to make, and multilateralism where I'm sure that it would be more than happy to be the leader. This is no time for global policemen and lone warriors. Our foreign and security policy has to handle global pressures and local dynamics. It has to cope with superpowers as well as increasingly fractured identities. Our union will work to strengthen our partners. We will keep deepening our transatlantic bond to our partnership with NATO, while we will also connect to new players and explore new formats. We will invest in regional orders and cooperation among and within regions, and we will promote reformed global governance. Global governance. I do believe that they want a global empire here, one that can meet the challenges of this 21st century. We will engage in a practical and principled way, sharing global responsibilities with our partners and contributing to their strengths. We have learnt the lesson. My neighbors and my partners' weaknesses are my own weaknesses. And this is the kind of thinking that leads them to believe that they can interfere in their neighbor's business. So we will invest in win-win solutions and move beyond the illusion that international politics can be a zero-sum game. I'm not sure where the idea that international politics has to be a zero-sum game comes from. It obviously doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. International politics can be a zero-sum game, but it can also be mutually beneficial, where both sides come out ahead of where they were before they started. And it can also be mutually regressive, where both sides come out behind of where they started. So I don't, illusion that international politics can be a zero-sum game. Where does that come from? It certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. All of this will make each of our member states and each citizen of our union better off. All these goals can only be achieved by a truly united and committed Europe. Joining all our cultures together to achieve our shared goals and serve our common interests is a daily challenge, but it is also our greatest strength. Diversity is what makes us strong. There you have it. Diversity is strength. That's definitely cultural Marxism, and it doesn't take into account that in multicultural societies, you can actually see trust begin to wane. not just, from one group in the multicultural society not trusting another group, but also within a person's in-group, you can see people not trusting each other as much. This comes from the Putnam study, if you're interested in looking it up. But, diversity is strength. It can be, but it can also be a detriment. Yes, our interests are indeed common European interests. The only way to serve them is by common means. This is why we have a collective responsibility to make our union a stronger union. So, sounds kind of socialisty, and they're saying, give the Eurocrats in Brussels more power. The people of Europe need unity of purpose among our member states and unity in action across our policies. A fragile world calls for a more confident and responsible European Union. It calls for an outward and forward-looking European foreign and security policy. This global strategy will guide us in our daily work towards a union that truly meets its citizens' needs, hopes, and aspirations. A union that builds on the success of 70 years of peace, a union with the strength to contribute to peace and security in our region and in the whole world. So, in the whole world, that's saying we should be able to stick our nose into anybody's business. I do have a problem with that. So after that forward, these two paragraphs here, including this big wall of text, these are basically the introduction to the paper. So I think it's worth reading. We need a stronger Europe. This is what our citizens deserve. This is what the wider world expects. We live in times of existential crisis within and beyond the European Union. Our union is under threat. Our European project, which has brought unprecedented peace, prosperity, and democracy, is being questioned. Actually, I think having a whole bunch of U.S. military bases might have helped with the peace over the years after World War II, but that's another story. To the east, the European security order has been violated, and I believe it's talking about Russia annexing Crimea, but I'm not positive. While terrorism and violence plague North Africa and the Middle East, as well as Europe itself. So in North Africa, France actually played a big role in this, and so did Hillary Clinton in the U.S., destabilizing Libya, getting rid of Gaddafi. If you want to go look, there's some leaked emails that talk about why Hillary Clinton and France wanted to get rid of Gaddafi. But yeah, so a European Union member state actually contributed to that violence. Economic growth is yet to outpace demography in parts of Africa. Security tensions in Asia are mounting, while climate change causes further disruption. Yet these are also times of extraordinary opportunity. Global growth, mobility, and technological progress, alongside our deepening partnerships, enable us to thrive and allow ever more people to escape poverty and live longer and freer lives. Well, if you look at what they're doing with free speech in a lot of parts of the European Union, I'd say freer is a bit of an overstatement. We will navigate this difficult, more connected, contested, and complex world guided by our shared interests, principles, and priorities. Grounded in the values enshrined in the treaties and building on our many strengths and historic achievements, we will stand united in building a stronger union, playing its collective role in the world. So, yeah, they're stronger collective role in the world. I mean, that sounds like socialist, and we're going to butt into a bunch of other people's business. Again, I'm not a fan. Okay, so before I move on to this, I would like to point out that introduction was included twice in this document, which shows that they're kind of sloppy, in my opinion. Maybe it was done intentionally, but I tend to think not. I think that this is just sloppy. I think it's a bunch of people who have reached the Peter Principle who are running the European Union. But dealing with this, environmental degradation and resource scarcity know no borders. Neither do transnational crime and terrorism. The external cannot be separated from the internal. In fact, internal policies often deal with the consequences of external dynamics. We will manage interdependence with all of the opportunities, challenges, and fears it brings about by engaging in and with the wider world. In other words, this is just another excuse for them to butt into other people's business. They do look for more and more excuses to butt into other people's business as this goes on. Okay, so to further that point that they're looking for excuses, or they've come up with excuses, I should say, to meddle in other people's business. Internal and external security are ever more intertwined. Our security at home entails a parallel interest in peace in our neighboring and surrounding regions. So they're going to be looking to their surrounding regions. I don't just mean Europe or European countries that aren't in the EU. I'm talking about North Africa and the Middle East. It implies a broader interest in preventing conflict, promoting human security, addressing the root causes of instability, and working towards a safer world. Now, of course, those are noble goals, but I don't trust the European to have noble intent. I really do not. I just believe they're about power, more power for them. And speaking of more power for them and not just their neighborhood within Europe, state and societal resilience to our east and south. It is in the interests of our citizens to invest in the resilience of states and societies to the east, stretching into Central Asia. That probably means all the way to Pakistan, but certainly Afghanistan, and all the way south down to Central Africa. Yeah, good luck with that. Under the current EU enlargement policy, a credible accession process grounded in strict and fair conditionality is vital to enhance the resilience of countries in the Western Balkans and of Turkey. Okay, so those are countries in Europe, but I know Turkey's not in the EU, and I don't know which of the Balkans are and which aren't off the top of my head. Under the European Neighbourhood Policy, ENP, many people wish to build closer relations with the Union. Our endearing power of attraction can spur transformation in these countries, but resilience is also a priority in other countries within and beyond the ENP. So they are wanting to extend their reach, is what they're saying here. The EU will support different paths to resilience, targeting the most acute cases of governmental, economic, societal, and climate energy fragility, as well as develop more effective migration policies for Europe and its partners. Okay, so it talks about the ENP here, or the European Neighborhood Policy. Now, I'm going to take a break from this document for a second, and I am going to go to the Wikipedia page for that, because it's just a quick thing, and it actually isn't that nice about what it says. I mean, I think it's probably not the whole story because it's Wikipedia, but it's good enough for what I'm getting at here. The European Neighbourhood Policy, ENP, is a foreign relations instrument of the European Union which seeks to tie those countries to the east and south of European territory of the EU to the Union. These countries, primarily developing countries, include some who seek one day to become either a member state of the European Union or more closely integrated with the European Union. The ENP does not apply to neighbors of the EU's outermost regions, specifically France's territories in South America, but only to those countries close to the EU member states' territories in mainland Europe. These countries covered include Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Palestine, Syria, Tunisia in the south, and Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine in the east. Russia has a special status with the EU-Russia common spaces instead of ENP participation. The EU offers financial assistance to countries within the European neighborhood so long as they meet the strict conditions of government reform, economic reform, and other issues surrounding positive transformation. This process is normally underpinned by an action plan as agreed by both Brussels and the target country. The ENP does not cover countries which are in the current EU enlargement agenda, the European Free Trade Association, or the Western European microstates. In other words, we'll help you, but you're going to do what we want and you're going to change your government how we want. The EU typically concludes association agreements in exchange for commitments to political, economic, trade, or human rights reform in a country. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that is the EU saying we want to expand and dictate policy in your countries. Now, if you look at the map over here, you know, a lot of that, other ENP countries, all but Libya, okay, these are shithole countries for the most part. And their culture is so excessively different than the European Union that they're not going to be fixed during my lifetime, during my expected lifetime, or during your expected lifetime. They're really screwed up. A lot of them still run on a tribal sort of social structure where they marry their first cousins and have inbred kids and things like that. It's a mess, and the European Union wants to dictate what they do. You know, human rights. Like I say, that's all good and well, but they're pissing up a rope, basically. But yeah, it's basically we'll give you shit, but you're gonna change your government policies to be what we like. Just so you know what that is. Okay, so back to this now. So a little bit more on that ENP, or the societal resilience to our east and south. It is in the interest of our citizens to invest in the resilience of states and societies to the east, stretching into Central Asia, and south down to Central Africa. Fragility beyond our borders threatens all of our vital interests. Well, maybe you shouldn't have fucking bombed Libya and seen to it that Gaddafi was raped with a bayonet. I'm just saying. And I'm not proud of our involvement in that either, but should have put France on a leash. By contrast, resilience, the ability of states and societies to reform, thus withstanding and recovering from internal and external crises, benefits us and countries in our surrounding regions, sowing the seeds for sustainable growth and vibrant societies. Together with its partners, the EU will therefore promote resilience in its surrounding regions. A resilient state is a secure state, and security is key for prosperity and democracy. But the reverse holds true as well. To ensure sustainable security, it is not only state institutions that we will support. Echoing the Sustainable Development Goals, resilience is a broader concept encompassing all individuals and the whole of society. A resilient society featuring democracy, trust in institutions, and sustainable development lies at the heart of the resilient state. And like I say, I mean, North Africa is pretty fucked up. It's not as fucked up as sub-Saharan Africa, but, they're still running on a tribal structure, marrying their first cousins and having inbred children. That's going to be a difficult thing to fix without being pretty damn brutal. And I don't think the EU really wants to do that, but I do think that it wants to run these countries. I really do. But the European Union doesn't just want to stop with the Middle East and North Africa and even Central Asia, which, like I say, I think extends to Pakistan at least. The EU will invest further in strong bonds across the Atlantic, both North and South, so North America and South America. And there's some third world shithole stuff going on in South America that the EU might have been feeling that it could muscle in on and start to dictate things. A solid transatlantic partnership through NATO. Wait, I thought they wanted to be autocratic. But anyways, through NATO and with the United States and Canada helps us strengthen resilience, address conflicts, and contribute to effective global governance. NATO, for its members, has been the bedrock of Euro-Atlantic security for almost 70 years. It remains the strongest and most effective military alliance in the world. The EU will deepen its partnership with NATO through coordinated defense capability development, parallel and synchronized exercises, and mutually reinforcing actions to build the capacities of our partners, counter hybrid and cyber threats, and promote maritime security. So just standard rah-rah, let's have a military partnership bit. With the U.S., the EU will strive for a transatlantic trade investment partnership. Okay, so the transatlantic trade partnership, or trade and investment partnership, it hasn't been signed, and with Trump in office, I doubt it's going to be. I think it's going to be like the Trans-Pacific one that he basically killed, and I'm happy for. I have not read this particular agreement, but from what I understand is it would erode sovereignty, and it's basically just a big corporate, subsidy, basically. Anyways. Like the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with Canada, TTIP demonstrates the transatlantic commitment to shared values and signals our willingness to pursue an ambitious rules-based trade agenda. On the broader security agenda, the U.S. will continue to be our core partner. The EU will deepen cooperation with the U.S. and Canada on crisis management, counterterrorism, cyber, migration, energy, and climate action. In the wider Atlantic space, the Union will expand cooperation and build stronger partnerships with Latin America and the Caribbean, grounded on shared values and interests. Now, I'm curious as to what shared values and interests those might be. Perhaps socialism? It will develop multilateral ties with the community of Latin American and Caribbean states and with different regional groupings according to their competitive advantage. We will step up political dialogue and cooperation on migration, maritime security and ocean life protection, climate change and energy, disarmament, non-proliferation. I wasn't aware that any Central and South American countries had any nuclear weapons to proliferate. and arms control, and countering organized crime and terrorism. Now, on the organized crime in Central and South America, good fucking luck with that, EU. Have fun dealing with those cartels and gangs like MS-13. We will pursue a free trade agreement with Mercosur, build on the political dialogue and cooperation agreement with Cuba, and invest in deeper socioeconomic connections with Latin American and Caribbean countries through visa facilitation, student exchanges, twinning, research cooperation, and technical projects. Okay, so I bet this would be like the European Neighborhood Program, where it's you're going to do what we want if we're going to come in and do this. Sometimes that could be something simple like, oh, you want to extract this resource, well, you're going to pay our companies. That's just typical trade. But I suspect it would be a little bit more malicious than that. A lot of Central and South America is not very well developed. It has major problems. We will also actively support the negotiation and implementation of peace agreements in the region, as we are doing in Colombia. So yeah, Colombia has a bunch of rebels and screwed up shit that's happening, and I haven't followed that in a while, so I'm not the person to comment on that. But you know, hopefully they're successful in peace, but I kind of tend to think that Central and South America are going to do what Central and South America are going to do. But that doesn't mean that the EU doesn't want a lot of influence over there. I think they really do want a lot of influence over there. Okay, and if you're not convinced that the EU wants a larger global footprint, global governments for the 21st century, without global norms and the means to enforce them, peace and security, prosperity and democracy, our vital interests are at risk. Well, some countries don't want democracy. Even if you consider a republic a democratic form of government, I don't want democracy. I don't want the direct voting. I don't like the tyranny of the majority. Guided by the values on which it is founded, the EU is committed to a global order based on international law, including the principles of the UN Charter, which ensure peace, human rights, sustainable development, and lasting access to the global commons. This commitment translates into an aspiration to transform rather than simply preserve the existing system. So, yeah, they want to transform it into their own image. The EU will strive for a strong UN as the bedrock of the multilateral rules-based order and develop globally coordinated responses with international and regional organizations, states, and non-state actors. I wonder which non-state actors they're talking about. USAID and maybe the Open Society Foundation? Reforming. A commitment to global governance must translate into the determination to reform the UN, including the Security Council. Yeah, preferably into something more malleable by the EU, and the international financial institutions, IFIs. Resisting change risks triggering the erosion of such institutions and the emergence of the alternative groupings to the detriment of all EU member states. The EU will stand up for the principles of accountability, representativeness, responsibility, effectiveness, and transparency. You know, those are all big buzzwords, but, you know, what do they mean from the EU's perspective? The practical meaning of such principles will be fleshed out case by case. We will continue to call upon members of the UN Security Council to not vote against credible draft resolutions on timely and decisive action to prevent or end mass atrocities. You know, except for, having France go in and bomb Libya, with the US, of course. Across multilateral fora, and, in particular the UN, the IFIs, and the international justice organizations, the EU will strengthen its voice and acquire a greater visibility and cohesion. In other words, there it is, more power for the EU. We will work towards an increasingly unified representation of the Euro area and the International Monetary Fund. Now, that's important because if you want to control a country's economy and, in point of fact, many government policies, one of the things you do is you get the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, to go in and to loan them money that they will not be able to afford to pay back. And then when they can't afford to pay it back, you go in and you dictate how they're going to do business. I mean, this happened to Greece with the Troika. The IMF was part of the Troika. I'm just saying this is a kind of a dirty thing that they're looking to go after. I'm not a big fan of the IMF either, if you haven't noticed. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a bit, and I'm going to go back to the whole idea of a European army or a European Union military. I don't think it's going to happen because I'm pretty sure the EU doesn't want to pay for it. I think it wants the member states to pay for it and provide it. And I don't think that they're going to be very happy about giving conscripts like the Romanians had to do to the Ottoman Turks. But here we go. First, European security hinges on better and shared assessments of internal and external threats and challenges. Europeans must improve the monitoring and control of flows which have security implications. This requires investing in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, including remotely piloted aircraft systems. Don't drone me, bro. Satellite communications and autonomous access to space and permanent Earth observation. That's great, build a space shuttle, there you're up. As regards to counterterrorism, member states must implement legislation concerning explosives, firearms, and passenger name records, as well as invest in detection capabilities and across-the-border tracing of weapons. Good luck with that, with all the Islamic smuggling networks that you've introduced into your countries by letting all of the immigrants in. Second, Europeans must invest in digital capabilities to secure data, networks, and critical infrastructure within the European digital space. We must develop capabilities and trusted digital services and products and cyber technologies to enhance our resilience. We will encourage greater investments in skills across member states through cooperative research and development, training, exercises, and procurement programs. Third, regarding high-end military capabilities, member states need all major equipment to respond to external crises to keep Europe safe. This means having full-spectrum land, air, space, and maritime capabilities, including strategic enablers. Strategic enablers, I'm not exactly positive what they're talking to, but that could be talking about nuclear weapons. Now, the UK, who hasn't left the EU, they have nuclear weapons, and France is a nuclear power, and I believe that's it. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. To acquire and maintain many of these capabilities, member states will need to move towards defense cooperation as the norm. Member states remain sovereign in their defense decisions. Nevertheless, okay, so this nevertheless here, it's like a however or a but. Everything before that is bullshit. So, nevertheless, here's what the EU wants. Nationally oriented defense programs are insufficient to address capability shortfalls. We remain far from achieving our collective benchmarks, including 35% of total equipment spending in collaborative procurement. In other words, it sounds like the EU wants all of its member countries to hand over 35% of their equipment spending so that they can have an EU military. That's what it sounds like to me. The voluntary approach to defense cooperation must translate into real commitment. An annual coordinated review process at EU level to discuss member states' military spending plans could instill greater coherence in defense planning and capability development. This should take place in full coherence with NATO's defense planning process. I thought they wanted to be more autocratic. The European Defense Agency has a key role to play by strengthening the capability development plan, acting as an interface between member states and the Commission, and assisting member states to develop the capabilities stemming from the political goals set out in this strategy. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead a bit here to show you something else. Okay, so first, CSDP is Common Security and Defense Policy. So it's just basically EU defense policy. So second, CSDP must become more rapid and effective. Europeans must be ready to rapidly respond to crises in full compliance with the UN Charter. This requires member states to enhance the deployability and interoperability of their forces through training and exercises. Okay, so this is key right here. This is going to imply compatible equipment, compatible training methods, compatible tactics, compatible strategies, and it's also going to need to have a way of dealing with how to merge the various chains of command, which can be done without forming an EU army, but I guarantee the EU wants its own military. We must develop the capacity for rapid response also by tackling the procedural, financial, and political obstacles which prevent the deployment of battle groups, hamper force generation, and reduce the effectiveness of the CSDP military operations. At the same time, we must further develop our civilian missions, a trademark of the CSDP, by encouraging force generation, speeding up deployment, and providing adequate training base on EU-wide curricula. Oh, EU-wide curricula. That sounds like a United States of Europe wants to have its own military. A responsive CSDP also requires streamlining our institutional structure. Oh, yeah, you mean like having your own military? We must strengthen the operational planning and conduct structures and build closer connections between civilian and military structures and missions, bearing in mind that these may be deployed in the same theater. Enhanced cooperation between member states should be explored in this domain. If successful and repeated over time, this might lead to more structured form of cooperation, making full use of the Lisbon Treaty's potential. So I'm going to finish up with this document. This is just the conclusion right here, which you see, the way ahead. This strategy is underpinned by the vision of and ambition for a stronger union. Again, that means more power to the Eurocrats in Brussels, willing and able to make a positive difference to its citizens and in the world. We must now swiftly translate this into action. First, we will revise existing sectorial strategies, as well as devise and implement new thematic and geographic strategies in line with the political priorities of this strategy. Such work must begin with clear procedures and timeframes agreed promptly by all relevant players. Second, the EU global strategy itself will require periodic reviewing in consultation with the Council, the Commission, and the European Parliament. In other words, a bunch of fucking bureaucrats. But, understand global strategy, and they do want to move into a more global position. I mean, it really does sound like they want to have their little global fiefdom. On a yearly basis, we will reflect on the state of play of the strategy, pointing out where further implementation must be sought. Finally, a new process of strategic reflection will be launched whenever the EU and its member states deem it necessary to enable the Union to navigate effectively our times. Our citizens deserve a true union. Oh, gee, true union, that sounds like a United States of Europe, which promotes our shared interest by engaging responsibly and in partnership with others. Well, it looks like Italy may be about ready to exit the European Union, so we'll see how that works out. But if you look, here are some acknowledgements from groups that helped produce this paper. Now, if you look in these acknowledgements, you find one. I don't recognize most of these institutions, but there's one that really jumped out at me. Open Society European Policy Institute. Open Society European Policy Institute. And this one is actually worth taking a look at because if you come over here and see who they are, offices and foundations, Open Society European Policy Institute. You look, Open Society Foundations. Let's go to About Us. And if you know anything about the Open Society, you know what I'm going to come up with here. And that's, well, look who the chair is. It's old Georgie Boy Soros, the guy who collaborated with the Nazi to send his fellow Jews off to the concentration camps and take their property during World War II. What a charming character, and I wouldn't trust him. He's globalist scum who would stab his own people in the back. He'd sure as hell stab you in the back. I hope that this was enlightening as to what the European Union wants. Have a nice day.